Hello,
Hello.
and welcome to Thursday at the Museum. And welcome to Institute of Arts Thursday at the Museum program. I'm Sharon Harrell, Community Engagement Manager with the Detroit Institute of Arts. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, general admission to the museum is always free for residents of Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. So if you enjoy our program today, we hope you're encouraged to visit us in the museum. If you want to leave a comment today, you can do so by writing in the chat on YouTube and in the comment section on Facebook. Today we have a virtual tour celebrating indigenous cultures. Behind the scenes, we have Christine Marks, Manager of Volunteer Development, and IPV Ray Henney, along with our presenters, Kathleen McBroom, Deb Coombs, and Jane Strand. We hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Sharon. And hello, everybody. Hello, Deb. Hello, Jane. How are you today?
We're great. How are you?
Good, and glad to be here. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming. Now it's November, and November is when we celebrate Native American Heritage Month. So we're going to be looking at some amazing pieces of art that we hold in our Native American galleries. And all of our Native American galleries and our Early Americas galleries are all found on the first floor of the museum. And they represent cultures that range geographically from the southern tip of South America all the way up through Central America and on up into Alaska, up in the far north. And these include ancient people who are long gone, as well as cultures and communities that thrive today. Now, one thing we'd like you to remember as you look at all these items is that, like many indigenous cultures, Native Americans had no concept of the idea of like art for art's sake. Everything that we look at today had a very specific practical purpose. Maybe it was an important element that was used in a rite or a ritual. Maybe it was something that was embellished to show off the elevated social standing of the person who was holding it or using it. But everything we looked at was never considered a standalone piece of art. Everything was made to be used, shared, and seen by other people. Now, it's generally accepted that humans were well established in the Americas 30,000 years ago. And we know for a fact that there were people here in Michigan as long ago as 11,000 years ago. Unfortunately, we don't know what a lot of these peoples called themselves. We don't know what languages they spoke, but we do know that they created amazing artifacts that speak to us through the centuries. So Ray, if you would, can we get going with our first example today? And here we have a couple of very small carvings, and these are called bird stones. And both of these specimens happen to be over 3,000 years old. They're quite small. They measure about 2 or 3 inches around in circumference, and they're about 4 or 5 inches long. And they're made from something very special. They're made from Michigan banded slate. Michigan banded slate is a type of sedimentary rock that is only found here in Michigan. And it was formed by geologic processes, pressure, back when glaciers covered what is now most of the Midwestern part of the United States. And when the glaciers began to melt and they began to retreat, the geologic pressure forced this banded slate down, and it created these different layers that we see here that are very pronounced in these two little sculptures. And ancient Americans believed that because these banded slate was so unique, it probably possessed all sorts of spiritual power. And so when some of this banded slate was discovered, it would be marked off. Ancient carvers would use small stone hammers to rough out these kinds of shapes. And then they would be highly ground and polished until the beauty of the stone could shine through. So you can see here the natural stripes and all the linear markings on here. Now, historians can't be positive exactly what these bird stones were used for, but it's generally believed that they were probably ornaments that were used as symbolic embellishments on hunting weapons. The banded quartz would have, as I said, already possessed some kind of special spiritual significance. And so if it was used for a practical use, like a weapon, it probably would increase the weapon's power. It would embody these auspicious elements. So in other words, they would take a practical object, they would make it more beautiful, and so the object's functionality would be improved. The more impressive the weapon, the better the results. So let's consider how some other cultures integrated art and functionality. Jane, I think you've got some examples for us from South America. So take it away.
Yes, we are going down to Peru and South America in about the year 1500 and going to see some objects that were created by the Inca culture. Small stone figurines like these, like this one, or canopas of llamas and alpacas were the most common ritual effigies used in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia. These devotional objects were often buried in the animals' corrals to bring protection and prosperity to their owners and fertility to the herds. The cylindrical cavities in the animals in their backs, which you can see in this video, in this slide, were filled with offerings to the gods in the form of a mixture, including animal fat, cocoa leaves, maize kernels, and seashells. And many of the families also had placed these little canopas on altars in their homes, making wishes for a large and healthy herd, because alpaca and llama wool was mixed with cotton to make the yarn that was so important in their extremely aggressive weaving of fabric, clothing, and rugs and blankets. These figurines are vessels carved from alabaster. And before I met these four wonderful little animals, I thought alabaster only came in white, but you will see different. These figurines were carved from alabaster. We'll see four different ones done by extremely talented carvers, and they are extremely realistic. Imagine looking at this little figurine and holding it and being held in the carver's hand as he carefully carved their wool and their faces and really made them come to life. Next, so this one, you can see a smile on the face and the heavy wool mane, and then some striations in the back. And these range in size from about 2 to 5 inches long and maybe 1.5 to 2 inches tall. Next slide, please. So here's one with a similar shape and a similar smile, but it's two-toned. It has tan and black on it, and you can see the deeply engraved carvings that represent the wool. And this one looks like almost like it has eyelashes on the top. And when I look at these in the case, I just smile. They make me smile. And I hope when you come down to the DIA and are in the Peruvian gallery, you will take a look at them, because I'm sure they will make you smile too. Next slide. Now, this is a completely different kind of carving, isn't it? So the person who did this didn't have any carvings or striations. There is an indication of a mouth and an eye, but otherwise it's just this very sleek, very modernistic. We don't know if it's an alpaca or a llama, with that beautiful black alabaster. And that's really different. Okay, we have one more. This one is similar in size and shape to the first two, but again, no carvings on the wool, and you can see another smile. And this opening almost seems like a heart shape. But anyway, okay, I think that's it. I think that's it for me, the four canopas, and you'll fall in love with them when you see them. Okay.
Thanks, Jane. Jane, those are beautiful. But tell me something. I understand you like them so much you even named one of them after you.
I would be honored and flattered.
Yes, we all would be. They're so darling. Okay, but now I want to talk to you about another wonderful object. This time we're moving north. We're going up into Mexico, and we're looking at Mesoamerican culture that was made up of a great number of small kingdoms in present day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. And this is the ancient Mayan civilization. Beginning with the 1st century BCE, Mayan artists used materials from the earth to create small sculptures that depicted gods, people, animals, and foods. Jaina Island is a mile-square island in the Gulf of Mexico. Positioned in the direction of the setting sun near the Maya world's end, this land was used as a cemetery for the Mayan elite. When the grave sites on Jaina Island were excavated, many of the deceased were found with figurines like this one sitting on top of their bodies. This Jaina style figurine is of an embracing couple, and it was created by an unknown Mayan artist from terracotta clay between 700 and 900 CE. It's about 10 inches high. Now, here we see an old man and a young maiden are standing close together with their arms around each other. He has a shriveled face and a bald head, but his huge deer headdress identifies him as a person of importance. The woman has a beautiful rounded face, closely set eyes, and a flattened forehead that is accentuated by her elaborate coiffure. She reaches for the man's face and he stares at her and he touches her leg. In their culture, Mayans believed that the moon was female and that their moon goddess had great influence over many aspects of their society. Seductive and serene, the moon goddess controlled night, birth, fertility, and death. She was often shown as in an affectionate pose with this elderly male, who was the god of the sun, life, daylight, and of the Mayan calendar. The attraction for the moon goddess for the sun god ensured that rain would fall, that the earth would endure, that the heavenly bodies would continue on their appointed rounds, and that life would come from death. And so, scholars suggest that this figurine referred to the mythical pairing of the gods. The man's body, as you can see on the left, is painted earth red, while a distinctive blue paint was added to the woman's headdress, ear ornaments, and gown. This brilliant blue color, known as Mayan blue, and it's a durable pigment that was made by mixing indigo with a special clay found only in the Yucatan. This pigment is highly resistant to the effects of light, acid, and time, and it gave the Jaina figures their vibrant hues that lasted to this day. If this figure does depict the moon goddess, she was represented to look like a Mayan noblewoman, for her hair ornaments and artificially elongated skull represent those of the Maya elite buried at Jaina. Our figurine is composed of molded faces and body fronts and more simply modeled backs. Some of the ornaments were appliqued and some were incised. This piece is hollow and it could function as a whistle. It is thought that these whistles were played at funeral ceremonies to aid the dead in their transition to another level of existence. Our embracing couple is superior in its preservation, and it is the finest piece of its type known today. Kathleen and Jane, I want to continue with this topic of including small objects in graves. You know why? We still do this to this day. How many of us have quietly put an object in our loved one's casket, like a photo, like prayer beads, or even a flask of whiskey or a deck of cards? The next three objects we'll look at were found in burial sites from the Colima culture of Western Mexico, where, beginning around 300 BCE, the ancient tradition of burying the dead in special graves called shaft tombs began to develop. Shaft tombs were characterized by a nearly vertical tunnel dug 3 to 20 meters down into volcanic rock. The base of the shaft opened into 1 or 2 horizontal chambers with a very low ceiling. Because the labor to create these shaft tombs was so intensive, Colima shaft tombs were used exclusively by the elite members of their society. The figurines that were found in those shaft tombs reveal tantalizing objects of Colima daily lifestyle and values. These clay objects were produced by the thousands and are best identified by their finely finished covering of a red slip. That's a mixture of water and fine clay that intensified their natural red color. Now, let's take a look at this object. We can all recognize it, can't we? Here we have man's best friend. Out of every single dog on the planet, yours is the best, isn't it? As we know, dogs were one of the first animals to be domesticated by humans. They have been beloved worldwide ever since, especially in the Americas, and we can prove it with this archaeological evidence called a Colima dog. Many expressive sculptures of small, fat, hairless dogs like this have been found in Colima shaft tombs. The people of the Colima culture valued their dogs as their loyal companions, their guardians, their healers, and sometimes even their food. Dogs were seen as a source of life, but their undying loyalty also linked them to the afterlife. Many cultures throughout the Mesoamerica believed that if you took care of your dog, it would take care of you. At the time of your death, your faithful dog would let you grab onto its tail and it would tow you to the land of the dead, where it would protect you and your soul forever in the afterlife. Now, in my opinion, that is a very good dog. By the way, this sculpture is not the only representation of a Colima dog that we have at the DIA. The next time you're at the museum, stop by Revere Court and look at this panel on the south wall. It displays Henry Ford giving a lecture to a trade school class on the Ford V8 engine. As you can see, Mexican artist Diego Rivera, he transformed this engine into the hairless Mexican dog of Colima. See his little ears and his tail? Very cute. And now for our next object. It's the parrot vessel. And it was made sometime between 200 BCE and 300 CE. It measures almost 9 inches tall and by 11 inches wide. This piece represented one of Mexico's most important climbers from the tropical regions. Notice its eyes and beak are covered in a different tone to emphasize its facial features. In ancient American societies, birds were powerful creatures that symbolized the realm of the sky. With their brightly colored feathers, parrots were seen as signs of fire and of the sun, and their ability to mimic human speech led to the belief that they were sacred communicators and messengers of the gods. Notice those tail feathers right there, that of our parrot. They're fashioned into a functional spout. So it is likely that this vessel was meant to hold sustenance of some form for the deceased individual. And the last object we're going to look at from the Colima culture is this beautifully ribbed tripod vessel. The bowl has a squash or melon-shaped body that is supported by 3 parrots. Each bird is positioned upward, and together the trio carries the bowl. The eyes of the birds are beautifully delineated, and their beaks pierce through the flesh of the gourd as they feast upon the bowl. Note that the label on our slide describes this piece as a gadrooned vessel. The term gadrooned refers to the inward or convex carving on the bowl. Our ceramic vessel measures approximately 9 by 14 by 15 inches, and it is enveloped with that rich red slip that distinguishes this vessel as a Colima object. In addition to its impressive form, Its iconography is very symbolic because in the pre-Columbian world, squashes and fruits represented fertility and abundance. And moreover, art imitates vessel life in this vessel, as the indigenous people of Mexico traditionally used hollowed gourds for serving their food and their drink. Christine, do you have any questions for us?
I actually have a question from an object that we passed a little bit ago. Jane, you covered the canopas, and we have a visitor who's wondering, what is the hole in the top for?
Well, am I supposed to answer that? I read it at the very beginning. The cylindrical cavities in their backs were filled with offerings to the gods in the form of a mixture including animal fat, cocoa leaves, maize kernels, and seashells.
Okay,
And,
great.
Yes, and then they would light that mixture, and then they would wish for a large and healthy herd, because the more alpacas and llamas you had, the more yarn you could make and the more weaving you could do.
Okay, so they were very important ceremonial pieces, weren't they?
Yes.
Yes.
And so much fun.
Yeah, they're so cute. And Deb, those little parrots, are they eating that gourd?
Yeah, look at their beaks. They're right into that gourd. They're eating it. And Christine, the other day you said something about a squirrel. Tell us.
Yes, in fact, my little buddy was out on the porch a few minutes ago. I have a pumpkin, and I left it whole, and he discovered that it had seeds inside. So he bored a little hole in it, and he comes every day and he gorges himself on pumpkin seeds. So I left it out there because he just spends a lot of every day just chewing at it and pulling the seeds out of it, and it's going to give him sustenance for the winter.
That's right. So you are their friend, and yes, they're going to eat those gourds. They love it, and so do we.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to move on. Jane, what do you have for us next?
Well, we're going to move up from South America and Mexico and into North America. And what you're seeing on the screen now is a large wooden bowl made of maple. It was made in around 1850. It's quite large. It measures 7 by 17 by 15 and 7/8 inches. And this was done by the Yankton Sioux culture in South Dakota. And Ray's going to put up the next slide for us. Okay. This bowl represents Iya, the spirit of gluttony. And the carved image with the face and the eyes, they represent Iya, an insatiably hungry spirit being. The Grand Medicine Society, an elite group of spiritual leaders of the Yankton Sioux Nation in South Dakota, held feasts in which enormous bowls like these overflowed with food. Such bowls boasted of the owner's ability to eat enormous quantities of food, which was a sign of spiritual power, like Iya. In this large bowl, the spirit seems to be offering the bowl's contents to the owner. These bowls were also used in feasts for overeating to, quote, protect themselves from a future famine. They did not want to go hungry. These objects are both ceremonial and functional, and it was felt that they could influence spiritual powers for personal or community benefit. These bowls were carved with a draw knife from a burl, which is a knot in a tree. Dense and tight curving grain patterns in burl makes it difficult to carve, but makes a piece resilient to cracking and splitting. So they had to carve the burl, and it was very hard to carve. And before the introduction of steel tools, the hollowing of the bowl was done by repeated burning and scraping of the burl. So they would burn the wood and then scrape the ash off, and then keep doing that until it became the depth that they wanted it to be. Bowls like this were taken to communal meals where people shared. And we are now going to look at another bowl in the same case at the DIA. And this is a bowl in the form of a beaver. This was done in around 1790 to 1800 by an unknown artist. But this is attributed, these kinds of bowls were attributed to the Ojibwe Anishinaabe culture in Michigan, where we are, and Ontario. This measures 25 by 13 by 4 inches. And it is in the same case as the Iya bowl. There are many other bowls in that case too. This shows a young beaver. And this is upside down, of course. You're going to see another image in a minute. You can see the markings on the tail, which are like a beaver tail, the hashtag markings. And there's a face on the other end. And the second image here is the bowl turned right side up, so you can see it. And this is a very good view of the hashtag carvings on the tail. Ray, next. Okay, this is an enlargement which shows, and Ray's going to show you, two skinny legs on each side of the bowl. You can't see them very well in the other one, so he enlarged it. And so you have the face and the tail and the legs. And the forelegs are incised in shallow relief on the sides of the bowl. The tail was used as a handle to carry the bowl. And this is a food bowl, like the Iya bowl. And this also was believed to influence spiritual powers for personal or community benefit, like a prayer to ask for something or to give thanks. And rituals of thanks and their ceremonies contain stories about ancestors of the past who received help from the spirits. And again, a man carved this bowl from a burl down in the tree and used a draw knife. And it was also used in ceremonies to offer thanks for blessings, make requests for health, and tell stories of creation. And the carvings give the essentially invisible nature of spiritual power a form or a face. And they played important roles in songs, dances, and feasts that honored spiritual powers. And is there one more slide, Ray? I've lost track, sorry. Is that the last one? I think so. Ray, next slide. Okay. Okay. That's all for the bowls. And Kathleen, we're going to move on with your next object.
Thank you, Jane. That was great. And I love that little face on the first Iya bowl with those big, round, empty eyes, feed me.
Yes, and before you go on, let me just add, I meant to say this. When you're looking at the bowl in the case, it's straight up, and that face is looking right at you. I mean, right directly in your eyes. It's the coolest thing. Okay.
It is. I agree. Well, Ray, let's go ahead and move on. And I'd like to invite everybody to take a little imaginary trip with me right now. Okay? So let's all close our eyes for a minute and pretend that we are all members of the Kwakiutl culture. We'd be out on the Pacific Northwest coast of the upper United States and lower Canada, and we would be celebrating a potlatch. Now, a potlatch was a very special feast. It was usually held annually, and it was a huge celebration that would go on for 3 or 4 days. And a family would invite all the other members of the clan and everyone else who lived within striking distance to come and celebrate with them. It would be a celebration to honor the ancestors of the family, the ancestors that had guided and the generations. And people would come, they would give gifts, trade, they would barter, they would gossip, and they would have huge feasts. And every night after the feast, they would have a special performance, a ritual that would include drumming and chanting and music and performances by various members of the clan who would put on amazing outfits that would embody the spirits of the supernatural beings that had helped their ancestors throughout the generations. So come with me now, and we're really full. We just had this huge feast. We're sitting outside. It's dark. It's late. It is pitch blackness. The only light and the only warmth comes from these huge bonfires. And we're sitting there, we're all together, and all of a sudden we hear the drumming, and then we hear the chanting. And then a figure appears out of the darkness. And this individual is wearing this grouse mask. And it's not just that this individual is wearing this grouse mask with the wig, with the tuft on the top of the head that extends almost a foot above their head, but they would also be wearing apparel that would stretch all the way from their neck to their toes, covering their hands and their feet. It would be impossible to identify who the human person was. And it wouldn't be important because this figure would be embodying the spirit of the grouse. And think how effective this would be. Think how the firelight from the bonfire would bounce off this bright, bright white. Think about how that red and the orange would dance in the midlight, in the light from the bonfire. And just think about how wonderful and how spiritual this would be. And before the dance, obviously, our family would have commissioned a special carver from our people, because every single carver had their own unique style and they brought their own interpretation to things. So this particular grouse mask that we're looking at was created in 1939 by a member of the Kwakiutl people. His name was Willie Seaweed. And Willie Seaweed was a very, very influential member of the Kwakiutl people. He was born in 1873 in Nugent Sound up in British Columbia. And he went on to become the chief. He was a carver. He was also a storyteller. And he did so much to help preserve the culture of the Kwakiutl people. And the way he made this mask, obviously, it's carved out of wood. And he's added the cedar bark and the cotton cord to make kind of the long tendril coming down and the tuft going up. And Willie Seaweed is basically accredited with being the first one to use this bright, bright white paint to make his mask that's that much more distinctive and more, and more impressive in the darkness. And the grouse was an incredibly important person at these celebrations because the grouse acted as the master of ceremonies. And the grouse would say, "Come out, brother, I call you now." And one by one, other individuals representing various different supernatural beings would come out and would join in the ritual. And it would be that this, incredible all together representation of the ancestry going back all the way of the family. And one thing I should probably say before I move on is that, Willie Seaweed to us, of course, evokes, the plants that grow in the ocean. But that's probably not the best interpretation. A better interpretation of seaweed might be the translation of smoky top, which would refer to volcanoes, which is a much more dynamic, I think, and strong name for Willie Seaweed. And as far as Willie Seaweed's inspiration for this mask, Ray, can we look at the next slide, please? So this is a spruce grouse we see on the right and on the left, I'm sorry. And this grouse is a native bird who lives in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. It's a game bird. It would have been very common and part of the diet of most of the indigenous people who lived out there. And when we look at it, you can see right around the eye, there's that bright red that Willie Seaweed incorporated into his mask. And it's a little bit difficult to see, but back behind the eye, there are tiny little spots of brown. And these are actually the grouse's ears, and they were tufted. And again, this is inspiration that Willie Seaweed took from the actual grouse and incorporated into his mask. One last thing is that in some various cultures out there, including the Canadian Kwakwaka'wakw culture, the grouse was seen as a spirit bird. Many indigenous peoples believed this, that birds were special creatures that could fly up into the upper world, up where the ancestors lived. And birds were special individuals. They could go up from the heavens where the ancestors lived and back down to the earth. And they could act as intermediaries, or they could take messages back and forth. So again, just imagine being outside on a cold night, being huddled around a bonfire with the warmth coming and the light, and you would hear the drumming and you would begin the chanting, and just think about what a wonderful spiritual connection you would hopefully be able to make with your ancestors through the stop song and the storytelling on that. So Christine, I don't know if we have any questions.
We actually have a couple. Well, we have one question. One was, in all the wooden pieces that we've seen, would women ever take on the role as a carver?
Well, we don't know. So many of these pieces are not signed. We know this one is by Willie Seaweed, obviously, because it's from the 20th century.
Right.
Most of the indication we have seem to indicate that men were the main carvers, but I don't think we can rule out that women might have participated in some of the aspects of creating these pieces of artwork. That's the problem with a lot of our art. It's so old that, you know, we don't know the names of the individual artists, and that's kind of a shame. So.
Well, like you mentioned earlier, too, a lot of this art was created that we consider art. It really was created for utilitarian purposes and for ceremonial and for rituals and for daily use. So they wouldn't have even thought to put their name on them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There was one comment too that the viewers said that they noted that there's very few maple trees in South Dakota, and I think that was in reference to Jane's piece on the Iwa Bowl. So thank you for that comment. You also got a few comments on what great work you're doing, and everyone's enjoying their day. So.
Cool. Congratulations. Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, whoever made those lovely comments. And now we're going to move on. And Deb, I think you've got another pretty amazing piece of Kwakiutl work for us to look at. So,
you know what, Kathleen, I can hear those drums right now. And I feel it's so cold outside. You feel like you want to cuddle up and listen to the drums and have some hot chocolate and get into the spirit of things. Well, you know, you're right. That Kwakiutl culture is a very colorful, interesting culture, and I love it. And this piece is this is another piece from their culture. And I'm going to talk about, we're talking about the trees. Well, here, you know, the Pacific Northwest coast is home to several Native American nations whose artists excel in creating wood sculptures from the cedar trees. The cedar trees grow in abundance in that region. And both animal forms and faces characterize Northwest coast art, just like the mask we saw. These forms are often combined or intertwined on a single object, and they are visual symbols that represent the view of the spiritual and the physical universe. The Kwakiutl are one of the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast. Most of them live in the their traditional territory on northern Vancouver Island and on the British Columbia mainland. This nation believed that their ancestors came in the form of animals by way of land, sea, or underground, and when one of these animals arrived at a given spot, it disregarded its animal appearance and it became human. This wooden object was made in 1927 by the Canadian artist Dick Price. It is a houseboard with an image of a Sisutl, a legendary double-headed sea serpent from the Kwakiutl culture. A houseboard is an architectural sculpture that would be hung over your doorway to protect people from evil spirits, and this one is approximately 4 feet high by 8 feet wide. It's quite imposing. Not only is it large, but it's frightening. This figure is an example of reverse imagery. So look, one side matches the other side. Let's take a look at this house post that has a fantastic head in the center with two dragon-like heads on either end. The center creature has curled horns, eyes that stare straight at us, a large mouth with bared teeth, and two hands that are positioned under its chin. The heads of the dragons have curled horns, curled snouts, bared teeth, and extended tongues. And that adds to create its very fierce appearance. Among Pacific Northwest cultures, horns indicate supernatural beings, and the protruding tongue of the dragons are associated with lightning and supernatural power. The Sisudal has scales that are made from the mineral mica. Sometimes you walk on the beach and you see these silver scales, flakes of mica that are found on the beach. By them, they were believed to be the discarded scales from the Sisudal's body. Stories of the Sisudal say this: it could be up to 4 feet in diameter and 20 feet long. It could see forward, backward, and in all directions. It could change its shape at any time, and it often changed into a self-propelled canoe that its owner would have to feed with seals, and that sometimes the Sisudal would cooperate with the thunderbird, another powerful creature, and together they would make thunder and lightning. While this sea serpent could strike terror in the human heart, it did teach the importance of staring fear in the face. The Sisudal was connected with war, with strength, with death and survival. It was ferocious when angered, and it was quick to kill its enemies. Warriors often wore headbands with this image to act as a protection in battle. And shamans of various indigenous tribes believed that killing a Sisudal would transfer its healing magic to them. So imagine this image over a door on your house, where its powerful symbol would only mean one thing: evil spirits, stay away. Christine, do you have any questions?
No, but that really is so much fun to think about it being a shape changer, isn't it?
Yes.
And we see that today in like Marvel movies and, animation, but these kind of ideas have been going on for hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. I wouldn't want to see it in real life. Okay.
Right.
Jane, what do you have for us next?
Well, we're staying in this gallery with the Sisudal and excuse me? Oh, okay. And this is a bentwood bowl or box from the Kaigani Haida culture way up in Alaska. And this is the smallest of several of these in a case. This particular one measures 5 by 8 and 5/16 times 7.5 inches. And this is a food bowl in the form of an animal. The animal's head is at one end and the tail is at the other. You can't see it except if you're right in front of the case, and bent legs on the sides. And animals often relate to the clan creature or crest of that family. Families identify with a special animal, and it becomes their protector and their well, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not getting the word. The bulging profile here is a symbol for the owner's hospitality and the bounty at a feast or celebration. The bowl would be filled with local foods and passed around at a feast gathering until empty. And this is called a bentwood bowl for a reason. Bentwood bowls use a single plank for all 4 sides, which are bent at the corners, and a second plank fitted and joined for the bottom. And you can see that the bottom wood is different, okay? So these planks were quite thick to withstand the bending without cracking and breaking. They were made wet, they were soaked in water and then heated with steam until they became completely pliable. Notches called kerfs are cut into the plank where the corners will be. And the sides 1 and 4 are lashed together, often with sinew cord. And again, this is a food bowl, and there are several others in there that can be used for storage or anything you would like. And the face on the end of this bowl represents a bear. And animals represented are native to the Northwest coast and appear on clothing, houses, totem poles, storage boxes, and ritual and ceremonial objects. And you can see that there's a face here and other shapes here, and I'm going to read about that. Bold animal forms and faces characterize Northwest coast art and are often combined or intertwined on a single object. On some objects, it may be difficult to pick out the animal forms because of the many abstract details, such as ovals and feather shapes, and you can see a feather shape on the side here. Objects that tell stories about Northwest coast people's origins are among the most important possessions of a family. The stories often tell of special relationships between ancestors and powerful spirit animals. Northwest coast groups have styles which express their origin stories, and wood sculpture dominates the area's art objects, which are made to show wealth, to communicate the family's power, and to indicate the prestige of their particular clan and what animal they are linked to. And we have one more slide. This is bigger than the other one, and it doesn't have a bulging edge. And you can see, again, that's the image of a bear in the middle. And then there are other abstract forms on there. And not unlike the food bowl, which was open, this has a top to it, a lid. So this probably would have been done for some kind of storage. And we are moving along, still in the same gallery, to this incredibly beautiful object. This is in the middle of this gallery, and it's full of light, and the light just lights up the gallery when you go in there. This is called a spirit box and was made in 2009 by a very famous now artist named Preston Singletary. He was born in 1963. He lived his whole life in San Francisco, and he was from a native culture, the Tlingit culture. He's a Native American glass artist with Northwest art. The dimensions of this box, it is quite large. Instead of wood being carved, this is a cast and sandblasted glass, and it measures 23 by 27 by 17 inches. So again, it's quite large. Preston Singletary attended the Pilchuck Glass School in Seattle, which of course was made famous by Dale Chihuly. He started as a student and he ended up as a teacher there. And glass became his chosen medium, known for elegant blown glass forms and mystical sand-carved Tlingit designs. He transformed the notion that Native artists are only best when traditional materials are used. And here is a quote that is actually on the sign on this box. Glass brings another dimension to Native American art. Its luminous quality and shadow effect are like a spirit that appears when the spirit is right. And Singletary began to dedicate his art making to continuing his cultural heritage when he was being trained. His images of Tlingit culture are true to the symbols, yet changed by his materials. And here is where the sandblasting takes the place of a carving knife. Next slide, please. On each end of this box, on each short side, there is an oculus, and you can see it here in the enlargement. It's a circle studied with beads, and that represents the starry heavens. And Tlingit's origin story is about the raven who brings light to the people. So his box is filled with light. Mm-hmm. And you can see two raven faces on the upper part of this glass sculpture and another bear in the middle. A bear was very, very popular. And if you stand, as I said, this box is in the middle of the gallery. And if you stand in front of it and look to the right, you will see the sissy oodle that Deb describes so wonderfully. And if you look above this box, you will see the case with all of the other Bentwood boxes. And you can see the similar forms, like the bear here and the bear on the Bentwood box. And it's really quite remarkable and very, very special. So I hope when you come to the DIA, you will go into this gallery and you will be amazed at how this just lights up the whole place. And I think there might be one more slide. There we go. That's a little enlargement. Okay, so there's the oculus. And here's a wonderful close-up, thank you, Ray, of the raven heads and the bear face. So I think it's time for Kathleen to move on, and she is going to finish out our presentation with one more object. Kathleen, take it away.
Thank you, Jane. And you're right. That spirit box just glows magically it's so beautiful, and it just sets such a wonderful tone in the gallery. And yes, believe it or not, we have come to our last object of today, and it is this magnificent bear claw necklace. Now, Jane has been referring to how important bears were in several Native American cultures. And this one comes to us from the Meskwaki Nation, which was out in Iowa. And this piece was made around 1835. And as we can see, it's made out of bear claws and different kinds of beads. And there's fur there. That's not bear fur, that's actually otter fur. And this was an incredibly important piece of adornment, because the bear claws themselves come from, actually, it's the now extinct subspecies of bear called the prairie grizzly bear. And these bears had these super long claws like we see here, so that they could navigate through the tall grasses on the prairie lands. And the bear was considered to be the most intelligent animal and the strongest animal, attributes that anyone would aspire to. But the claws themselves were held to be sacred, and only very special individuals could be given permission to incorporate bear claws into items of clothing or items of adornment like this one. And I should remind you, I know those of you who are regular viewers will remember that an object such as this, that's made out of like cloth, wool cloth and fur, is incredibly delicate. So I can't guarantee that this will be on display if you come down to the museum, because these objects need to be rotated in and out because of their delicate nature. They're so susceptible to damage from light and moisture and things. But if you ever get to see this, I don't think you'll ever forget it. This entire necklace is over 5 feet long. That's because the outer tail that you see going up in the center, that's actually a long tail that would hang down the back of the neck of the person who was wearing this. And the tail would actually extend all the way to the floor. And as I said, only an incredible person of very, very high social standing would be allowed to wear something like this. They would have to be the chief or perhaps a great warrior. Now, the big blue beads that you see between each of the bear claws there, those would have been probably obtained in trade with Europeans. But you can also see that there are the tiny seed beads that a lot of Native American cultures used. And women would have sewn these seeds onto the outer fur and onto the bases up at the top to form these intricate patterns. The women would have done this work, but they would not have been allowed to assemble the actual necklace. That task would have been the responsibility of a shaman or someone with very strong spiritual powers. They would be the only ones who could put this necklace together and make sure that it was structured in such a way that it brought forth the full protective powers of this amazing piece. And anyone who wore it, of course, would automatically be assumed to have the same attributes as the bear. Someone who was very strong, someone who was very intelligent, and again, someone who was, in a class all by themselves. And this brings us to the end of the show today. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I know we've all enjoyed bringing these pieces to you. And I can really want to encourage you to come down and visit our Native American galleries on the first floor. I also want to invite you down to some very special exhibitions that we have at the museum right now. And one, I have to tell you, it's a once-in-a-lifetime show. It's called Van Gogh in America. And it's only going to be at the museum until January 22nd. And this is a very special exhibition. They've brought over 80 pieces of art from around the world to this exhibition, including pieces from private collections. In addition to the Van Gogh in America, we have another special exhibition, and it's called Van Gogh's Artistic Roots, The Hague and French Realism. This one will be available in the museum until January 29th. Down on the first floor, we have a photographic special exhibition called Conscious Response, Photographers Changing the Way We See. That will be available through January the 8th. And one more, Printmaking in the 21st Century. That will be there until April the 9th. Now, back to Van Gogh in America for a minute. If you want to come and see this amazing exhibition, you must have advance tickets. There are no walk-ins allowed. And in order to get your tickets, you've got to go to dia.org. They will tell you how to get your tickets. And I think you'll find that a lot of the tickets are already gone. If you want to come, I urge you to do so immediately. And also while you're on the website, dia.org, check and see, because we are going to be extending the museum hours to accommodate the crowds that are coming to see Van Gogh in America. Right now, we're already staying open an extra hour every day. And after the first of the year, we'll be extending our hours even further. So again, make sure, check dia.org to get the most up-to-date information. So a big thanks to my colleagues, Jane Strand and Deb Coons. Ladies, as always, it's a pleasure working with you. And a big thanks to Ray Henney, our IPV, who was our slide master today. Thank you, sir, behind the scenes. Also, big thanks to museum employees, Christine Mark and Sharon Harrell, who are the producers of this show. As far as next week, that's Thanksgiving. We won't have a presentation for you, but the week after that, December 1st, we'll be having a studio art making special event for you. And then December 15th, we will be presenting our very last Thursdays at the Museum of this year, and that will be on the history of the DIA. So please come back and join us. Again, on behalf of everyone, thank you for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and goodbye for now. So bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.